I got asked to interview, I think it was August 74, so I hadn't been on Melody Maker very long. And it was a Friday night, and Mick Watts sauntered up to my desk and kind of sat on the edge of it looking very suave, and I knew I was going to get lumbered with something. But he surprised me by asking if I'd like to interview Van Morrison that weekend at the, it was the first Nebworth Festival. And I said, you know, and a lot of people were. And
That's told you.
And I thought, yeah, fucking hell, Van Morrison, of course. And it only struck me a little later that I was barely Mick's first choice. He'd asked everybody, and they'd all come up with some excuse not to have to go and subject themselves to an hour with Van, which they knew was just going to be tricky and messy and unpleasant, and they probably wouldn't get much out of it. So they'd all kind of politely declined, come up with some excuses, but I was just made for it, and I loved Van. Astral Weeks is probably my favourite album. So, you know, I was ready to go. Unfortunately, I promised a friend of mine who's a press officer that I'd go with him to Swansea on the Friday night after work to see a band called O. Were playing the Paddy Pavilion, and I didn't really want to let them down. A band called O. They were signed to United Artists, so they were quite good. I said I'd go and review them. And I didn't want to let him down. I explained the problem to him, but he said, "No, don't worry about it. We'll go down, catch the first train back from Swansea in the morning. You'll get back to London in time to meet the coach to Nebworth that's leaving from the Warner Brothers office." So I said, "Oh, okay." Of course, the next morning the train was delayed. Then the second one was cancelled. So by the time we got back to London and got to the Warner Brothers office, the fucking coach had gone. And I suddenly realised I didn't even know where Nebworth was. I didn't have a clue, and I could just see, kind of that Mick Watts fuming somewhere, if I didn't turn up for it. So this guy Richard Ogden, who did press for a lot of bands on UA and worked with Andrew Border, he'd set up the Lemmy interview for me. He said, "Don't worry, my car's parked around the corner. I'll drive you there." I said, "You know where Nebworth is?" He said, "There's bound to be signs somewhere." So we shot off in the general direction of where we thought Nebworth was. And actually, but by accident, we evaded all the heavy traffic. We went up some country lanes and suddenly emerged. And we could see what was an entrance to the backstage area, which was so we drove up along this lane, and then there was a barrier across the lane in front of us. And Richard said, we better stop. And I said, "No, just drive through." And I had a card or something in my pocket, maybe a press card. So I started waving it frantically, and Richard didn't slow down. And this guy just kind of jumped to it and lifted the gate for us and moved us through as if we were real kind of VIPs. And we found a backstage car park, just dumped the car and walked through the crowd. And we were just coming over this hill to look at the rapidly filling natural arena where the Nebworth concert was held. And it was just as Tim Buckley appeared. And he just started Buzzing to Life, which is one of my favourite Tim songs. And I almost felt like, falling to my fucking knees in supplication. It was just so brilliant. We made our way slowly through the entire crowd to the front of the stage where the crash barriers were. I explained to one of the security people that, I was from Melody Maker, missed the coach and just arrived, by the back door. And he said, "Oh, just jump over the fence." So Richard and I jumped in. And then I realised there was nobody from the press there. They'd been on the official Warner Brothers coach, which had been stuck in traffic. So they missed Tim Buckley completely. I think the Marvishnu band were on by the time they arrived, and it's a wonder they just didn't turn around, get on the coach and drive back. What a load of fucking bollocks. Anyway, the sensational Alex Harvey band were on the bill as well, which really stood out. I was a huge fan and had written quite a lot about them at that time. And they just stopped to play by storm. They were just a huge success on the day. Then band came on, and it had been a bit meandering. I mean, it wasn't that hot, to be honest. There were some really great moments. Anyway, he went off stage. Somebody came up from Warner's and said, you know, band, we'll see you now. So we walked around backstage. Mick Watts came with me to make sure that I actually got in, because he'd been furious when I wasn't on the coach. And then, you know, even more furious for some reason when he found out I was already there and sent him up me, and you know, everybody else had fucking missed him. Anyway, the door opened, I was shown in, and there was a band right at the back of the trailer sitting at a small table with a can of Coke or maybe beer, which he was just tapping on the table. Just monotonous kind of metallic clang every time he put it down. And he just kind of nodded to me as I went in. And about a week earlier, there'd been a Melody Maker news story about a riot in Italy at a band gig, which he contested, said wasn't that a riot. I said, well, I hadn't even read the story, so I don't know what you're talking about. But because I worked for Melody Maker, he automatically assumed that I'd somehow written this news story, and I couldn't budge him from this fact. He said, why don't you check your facts before you write these stories? I didn't write the fucking story. And he wouldn't have it. Anyway, we started the interview, and I had a list of questions all written out. And he just wouldn't reply. He was just going to nod and go, yeah, fuck, you know, who cares? And he went on for about 10, 15 minutes, and I tried again. And there was just no rousing into any reasonable conversational response. So in the end, I just said, oh, fuck it, you know, we're wasting each other's time. I'm going to leave you now. And just walked to the door. And as I got to the door, he said, come back. He said, you can't walk out on me. I said, well, I'll stay if you're going to answer some fucking questions. And he said, sit down. He said, ask me another question. So I asked him another question. And he's just shaking his head. He said, where are these fucking questions coming from? I said, well, you know, I just rather weakly said, you know, just, you know, out of the, you know, a long love of your music. He said, who the fuck cares what you're thinking? And I said, okay, that's it, I'm really going now. He said, you can't walk out of me. He said, fucking watch me. So I just walked out. I didn't have enough to even write something spurious about this thing. It was just like a, you know, completely wasted opportunity. But I did get the chance, I guess it must have been about 10 years later, to do another interview. A friend of mine who'd worked for Steph named Kellogg's, I'd ended up somehow managing band, and there was a day of European press, and he called me up and said, look, you know, there's a slot if you want to come along and do band. I said, I'll give it another go. And it was at Brown's Hotel, you know, this kind of small room. And I went in, we were introduced, the photographer took a few shots, and we sat down and started the interview. And he was a lot more responsive this second time, but he had an agenda. There was a song on the new album that went on about all the people that had ripped him off. Bruce Springsteen was top of the list. He really didn't like Bruce at all. And I thought, wow, this is getting somewhere. So he started chatting a bit more, and I wouldn't say he was opening up, but it was more than I expected. And I can't remember what I asked him, but it led him to reminisce about, you know, growing up in Belfast. And it was all really quite engrossing. And he suddenly said, that's it. I said, what? He said, the hour's up. And he wasn't wearing a watch, there was no clock in the room, but he knew when the hour was up. And as he said that, there was a tap on the door, and it was Kellogg's, you know, the hour's up, you have to leave. And I said to Kellogg's, I said, how does he fucking know? He said, it's exactly like it on stage. He said, he might be, you know, he's playing a set, he might be in the middle of a song, but when he knows the hour's up, his contracted hour, he'll stop in the middle of a song and walk off, you know, because he's not getting paid for the extra bit. And years later, I knew a drummer named Bobby Irvin who used to drum for Nick Lowe, and also a gig with Van, touring with Van. And I used to meet him on Twickenham Green, and he said, "Oh, just come off tour with Van. Oh, how did that go?" He went, "Oh, for fuck's sake, don't ask." And he told me that one night they were doing Almost Independence Day, which Van had just decided he was going to do. And he said it was the most spectacular sort of 10 minutes that he could think of playing behind Van. You know, he was just building this up and up and up, doing all the kind of vocal techniques. And, you know, Bobby said, "Oh, the ending of this song is just going to be so, we're going to really hit it in a couple of minutes." And with that, Van went like that and walked off stage. The hour was up. He just didn't care where he was in the song, where he could possibly take it. You know, if he wasn't getting paid for the extra time, you know, he was gone.
That is brilliant. That is brilliant.